Welcome. This is Cheating Tale Stories. Tell me where you're watching from. I discovered my colleague's affair was destroying my marriage. But the truth behind her deception was far more sinister than I ever imagined. But before we dive into today's story, please subscribe for more interesting stories. My name is Marcus, and I thought I understood the rules of workplace relationships. Keep things professional, maintain boundaries, and never get too involved in other people's personal drama. But sometimes, life has other plans. I'd been working at Meridian Financial for 8 years when Cassandra joined our compliance department. She was sharp, ambitious, and had this way of making everyone around her feel like they were part of something important. Within weeks, she'd integrated herself into our tight-knit team like she'd always belonged there. Cassandra was married to a guy named Derek who worked in construction. She'd mention him occasionally, usually with a slight eye roll or a comment about how he just didn't understand her career ambitions. Nothing too unusual there. Lots of couples have different priorities. But after about 6 months, I started noticing changes in her behavior. She'd take long phone calls during lunch breaks, speaking in hushed tones. She'd work late more often, claiming she had important projects that needed her attention. And she started dressing differently, more polished, more deliberate. The first time she mentioned James, I didn't think much of it. "There's this guy from the investment division," she said during one of our coffee breaks. "He really gets what I'm trying to accomplish here." She spoke about him with this spark in her eyes that I'd never seen when she talked about Derek. Over the next few weeks, James became a regular topic of conversation. How brilliant he was, how he understood her ambitions, how different he was from other men. The signs were obvious to anyone paying attention. Cassandra was falling for someone who wasn't her husband. I should have kept my distance, should have minded my own business. But Cassandra had this way of drawing people into her orbit, making you feel like you were her confidant, her trusted friend. And honestly, I was flattered that she chose me to share these intimate details with. "Marcus," she said one afternoon, her voice heavy with what seemed like genuine anguish. "I don't know what to do. Derek and we're like strangers living in the same house. But James, when I'm with James, I feel alive again." I found myself offering advice, playing the role of supportive colleague. I told her that marriages go through rough patches, that maybe she should try counseling with Derek before making any drastic decisions. But even as I said the words, I could see she'd already made her choice. The affair became an open secret between us. She'd tell me about their lunch meetings that ran long, their business dinners that stretched into the evening, their weekend conferences that Derek never seemed to question. I became her alibi coordinator, covering for her when she needed to slip away, providing excuses when people asked where she was. I justified it by telling myself I was being a good friend, that everyone deserves someone to talk to during difficult times, that it wasn't my place to judge her choices or interfere in her marriage. But the situation started affecting my own life in ways I hadn't anticipated. My wife, Elena, began noticing that I was distracted, that I'd become secretive about work conversations. When she'd ask about my day, I'd find myself editing out entire chunks of what had actually happened. "You seem different lately," Elena said one evening as we were cleaning up after dinner. Distant. "Is everything okay at work?" I assured her everything was fine, but the lie sat heavy in my stomach. The truth was, keeping Cassandra's secret was becoming exhausting. I was constantly monitoring what I said, who I talked to, making sure I didn't accidentally reveal anything that might get back to Derek or damage her reputation. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Thursday, around 9 p.m., when my phone buzzed with a text from Cassandra. "Emergency. Can you meet me at that coffee shop on 5th Street? Please, I really need someone to talk to." I found her sitting in the corner booth, mascara smudged, hands shaking around a paper cup. She looked genuinely distraught, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. "Derek knows," she whispered as I sat down across from her. "He found some messages on my phone. He's threatening to tell everyone at work. Ruin my career, destroy everything I've built." My heart sank. This was exactly what I'd been afraid would happen. "Cassandra, maybe it's time to come clean. If you explain the situation, maybe you can work through this." She shook her head violently. "You don't understand. Derek isn't just angry about the affair. He's dangerous when he gets like this. He's made threats before." The fear in her voice seemed genuine, and I felt a protective instinct kick in. Here was someone I cared about, someone who'd trusted me with her deepest secrets, and she was in real danger. What do you need me to do? I asked. I need you to talk to him, she said, reaching across the table to grab my hand. You're the only person who knows the whole situation. If you could just explain to him that this isn't about him, that it's about me finding myself, maybe he'd listen to reason. Every rational part of my brain was screaming that this was a terrible idea, getting involved in someone else's marital drama, especially as the messenger for the cheating spouse, was a guaranteed way to make enemies and create problems. But Cassandra was crying now, talking about how Derek had already started calling her work friends, how he was planning to show up at the office and expose her for what she really was. The image of her professional life imploding because of a personal mistake. I couldn't stand by and watch that happen. So I agreed to meet with Derek. We arranged to meet at a restaurant downtown, neutral territory where he hopefully wouldn't cause a scene. I spent the entire day beforehand rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd present Cassandra's side of the story in a way that might preserve some dignity for everyone involved. Derek turned out to be nothing like what I'd expected. Instead of the volatile, threatening figure Cassandra had described, he was soft-spoken, articulate, and surprisingly calm. He thanked me for agreeing to meet with him and ordered coffee like we were having a normal business lunch. I appreciate you coming, he said once we'd settled into our booth. Cassandra says you're the person she trusts most at work, so I figured you might be able to help me understand what's been going on. I launched into the speech I'd prepared, explaining how sometimes people grow apart, how Cassandra wasn't trying to hurt him, how these situations were complicated and rarely anyone's fault. Derek listened patiently, nodding occasionally, asking clarifying questions that showed he was really trying to process what I was telling him. But then he said something that stopped me cold. Marcus, I think there might be some confusion here. Cassandra and we've been separated for over a year. We're in the middle of divorce proceedings that she initiated. There's no marriage to save. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? She moved out last spring, Derek continued, his expression genuinely puzzled. She said she needed space to focus on her career, that she felt suffocated by domestic life. I've been living alone since then, and we only communicate through lawyers now. My mind was reeling. Nothing he was saying aligned with the story Cassandra had been telling me for months. But she talks about you all the time, about your relationship problems, about trying to make things work. Derek's face darkened with understanding. What exactly has she been telling you? As I recounted months of conversations, Derek's expression grew increasingly grim. The fights she described that never happened. The threats he'd supposedly made that were completely fabricated. The desperate marriage she was trying to escape that had already ended over a year ago. Marcus, Derek said quietly, I think you need to know something else. There is no James in the investment division. I've had my lawyer do some checking because Cassandra's been making claims about workplace harassment that didn't add up. Your company doesn't even have an investment division. The restaurant seemed to spin around me. Every conversation, every secret meeting, every moment of trust I'd shared with Cassandra, all of it had been built on lies. Then who? I started to ask, but Derek was already pulling out his phone. The man she's actually seeing, he said, showing me a series of photographs, is your boss, Richard Whitmore. The photos showed Cassandra and Richard together at restaurants, hotels, business conferences where spouses weren't invited. The timeline matched perfectly with when she'd started talking about James and working late and taking those mysterious phone calls. She's been using you, Derek said gently. You've been providing her cover for an affair with the head of your department. Every time you covered for her, every excuse you made, every alibi you provided, you were helping her manipulate the situation. The full scope of what had been happening crashed over me like a wave. Cassandra hadn't just been lying about her marriage or creating a fictional affair partner. She'd been systematically using my friendship, my trust, my genuine concern for her well-being to enable something that could destroy my career if anyone found out I'd been involved. Richard Whitmore was married with 3 children. He was also the person who would be making decisions about my future promotions, my job security, my professional reputation. If this affair became public knowledge and it came out that I'd been helping to facilitate it, my career would be over. Why are you telling me this? I asked Derek. Because you seem like a decent person who got caught up in something you didn't understand, he said. And because I think you deserve to know that the person you've been trying to help has been using you as a pawn in a much bigger game. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing through every interaction. I'd had with Cassandra over the past months. How many times had I covered for her when she was actually meeting with Richard? How many lies had I unknowingly supported? How many people at work knew about this affair and assumed I was complicit? Elena was waiting for me when I walked through the door. She took one look at my face and knew something was seriously wrong. What happened? She asked. For the first time in months, I told her the complete truth. About Cassandra's supposed affair. About my role as her confidant. About the lies I'd discovered. About the Real affair that I'd been unknowingly enabling. Elena listened without interruption, her expression growing more concerned with each revelation. Marcus, she said when I finished, you need to distance yourself from this situation immediately. If this comes out, it could ruin everything we've built. She was right, of course, but the damage might already be done. I'd spent months being seen as Cassandra's closest ally at work, the person she confided in, the one who made excuses for her absences and covered for her behavior. If the affair with Richard became public, everyone would assume I'd known all along. The next morning at work, I could barely focus on anything. Every time I saw Cassandra across the office, every time Richard walked past my desk, I felt like I was carrying a bomb that could explode at any moment. Cassandra tried to approach me around lunchtime, probably wondering how my conversation with Derek had gone. I told her I needed to focus on work and couldn't talk about personal matters anymore. The hurt and confusion in her eyes almost made me feel guilty, until I remembered that every emotion she'd shown me over the past months had been calculated manipulation. I never did find out how the affair ended or what consequences Richard and Cassandra faced. I made it clear to Derek that I wouldn't be providing any information to support his divorce case, but I also couldn't continue being Cassandra's unknowing accomplice. What I learned from this experience is that some people are master manipulators who can make you feel special, trusted, important, while they're actually using you for their own purposes. Cassandra didn't see me as a friend. She saw me as a useful tool, someone gullible enough to believe her stories, loyal enough to keep her secrets, and positioned well enough to provide the cover she needed. The worst part wasn't even the lies she'd told. It was realizing how easily I'd been manipulated, how my desire to be helpful and trusted had blinded me to obvious red flags. She'd played on my ego, made me feel like I was her special confidant, when really I was just another pawn in her game. I still work at Meridian Financial, though I've learned to maintain much stronger boundaries with colleagues. Cassandra eventually left the company, and Richard, well, let's just say his marriage survived. But his professional reputation took some hits when certain truths came to light. The experience taught me that workplace relationships require the same caution as any other relationship. People aren't always who they seem to be, and sometimes the person asking for your help is actually the person you need protection from. If you've made it this far, I'd appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments if you've ever found yourself caught up in workplace drama that wasn't what it seemed. Sometimes the most dangerous betrayals come from the people we trust most.